Welcome everybody to the second annual AI Futures Conference. For those of you who remember last year, Dr. Holmberg and myself were here for the first launch of what is, for us, been an exciting collaboration for several years. We hope there will be one next year as well. So whatever you hear today, whether you disagree, agree, or just curious, as the dean says, please think about whether or not next year we could find more voices to include in this conversation. Maybe we want to have a student symposium, maybe we want to have some graduate students share some of their research, maybe we want to have faculty share some of their projects. We want this to be a living, breathing conference. So today, in the spirit of that, we're gonna start with our first opening kickoff. As I said, Dr. Holmberg and I are at San Jose State, and today's talk is going to roughly try to define a terrain that seems important all over the world. Everywhere we've traveled in the last year, including Australia and New Zealand and friends from Oceania, everyone is talking about agency. And everyone is worried about the relationship of agency and AI. So I think that'll be something to motivate the talk a bit. Our focus, of course, based on our new book, will be looking at this relationship between cognitive offloading and productive struggle. And we were so glad to hear the dean here at ELTE mention the question of productive struggle and what counts as it. So we'll elaborate on that a bit. Other than that, let me think. Today's agenda, Carrie, you want to tell us what we're going to be facing and seeing?
Sure, we're breaking up our 75 minutes into these parts that you see on the slide, briefly, an introduction. And then Dr. Duckor will be, Brent, be introducing the problem of AI and deeper learning, some background. I'll talk about the 5 pillars of practice in the middle portion, and then the future directions will go back to Brent before we have time for questions from you all. And are we holding fast to that questions at the end? We want people to hold their questions.
I think we should try to, and I also think that there will probably be some questions along the way. So we'll try to take some opportunities for pauses and just a moment to sort of breathe as we move through the ideas. So yes, I think we're going to have questions at the end, but if you have a burning question that you feel like really is poignant, please share it with us. We'll be glad to hear it. I've been charged with sort of kicking this off, and so we've got the introductions done. You know a little bit about where we're coming from. We are at San Jose State. We're at the Center for Innovation and Applied Education Policy. Carrie and I have been working together as colleagues for almost, God, I want to say 20, but it's probably only 16 or 17 years. This will be our 3rd book together, and it really is an extension of the first 2. We began a journey looking at the relationship between ambitious teaching and formative assessment, and we then extended that to looking at feedback. And most recently, we decided to update our thinking in the age of AI. So we'll tell some stories about that. Ready? Okay, good. Well, let's take a moment to figure out where we stand, because it's always good to remind ourselves a little bit about the chronology of where this all began. And of course, Hollywood is a wonderful place to get ideas about the future. It's been said, and this might be an urban legend, but it's been said that Steve Jobs, when he founded Apple, was a deep, deep Trekkie, we call them. Trekkie is a person who loves the television show Star Trek. And he loved the show so much, as did many of his engineers, that they invented certain kinds of technologies based on the fake props they saw in that television show, one of the most obvious ones being the so-called iPhone or the flip phone. So we forget that sometimes it seems like art is following life or life is following art. I'm starting to wonder more and more whether there is an evil genius who has planned out this whole future for us, and now we're just living it in the form of pictures, and we're learning about these things decade by decade. But before I get started with my own predilections about that promise or possibility, let me ask you, how many people know or have seen this movie? Raise your hand if you have. No hands are up. That's the generation gap right there. There it is in front of us. The next one, 1984, does anybody know that movie? The movie, The Terminator. Hands went up. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a very popular character, isn't he? He's been excellent at self-promotion. He would admit that himself. 2001, Artificial Intelligence. Whoever saw that movie? made by Steven Spielberg, a film that was not really well received when it was initially brought to the theaters, and it was sort of complex and difficult for people to take it in. Now it seems almost normal, but back then it wasn't that way. The next film, one of my favorites, Ex Machina, raise your hand if you've ever seen that one. Just a few hands have gone up, and for those of you in simulcast land, I don't know whether you've seen this, I don't have a screen, but that's a fascinating story about really what superintelligence would look like when it's embodied, and what the moral dilemmas will be once we have that kind of intelligence. And last but not least, one of my favorite all-time movies. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to push for those of you to go see it on your Netflix or your YouTube or wherever you can find it near you. Who's seen Blade Runner 2049? No hands are up. 2 hands are up. What did you think about that movie? Oh, not as good as the first one. Okay, that's fair, that's fair. What did you think about the movie 2049? Did you like it? Dr. Holmberg, didn't we hear that in New Zealand there was a survey done of 14-year-olds or somewhere in the age of 12 to 14, and was the number 40%? 42% of young people surveyed in New Zealand only recently, according to the ministry officials we talked to, claim that they have a friend in a chat GPT. That is, that they have a friend who is an agent. Now that's not that different than that movie, right? And we're now seeing that the popular masses, the culture, the people, we can have access to those kinds of experiences that we used to have to go to the movies to watch. Well, since you haven't seen this movie, and generally, I'm going to go ahead and just tell you a little bit about it just to get started, because I don't think you want to miss it.
Every civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce, but I can only make so many. Happy birthday.
There is an order to things. That's what we do here. We keep order. The world is built on a wall that separates kind. On either side there's no wall. You go to war.
You're a cop. I had your job once. I was good at it. I know. What do you want? I want to ask you some questions. The key to the future is finally unearthed. Bring it to me. They know you're here.
I always told you, you're special. Your story isn't over yet. There's still a page left.
Dramatic, huh? That's the stuff of Hollywood. And once you get past all of the usual bombastic parts of Hollywood, you're left with a very interesting impression. And that impression is that the future is coming for us, whether we like it or not. Of course, there will always be in American films people punching people and things blowing up. That's part of the American genre. But if you step back from that part and you ask yourself, what was that story really about? For me, that story was a kind of wake-up call for the technologies that many of our technologists today, including Elon Musk, actually see not as a dystopia, which is presented here, but rather as a utopia, in which every single human being, including you and me, by the 2049, let's say, will have a personal robot. Now let me say that again. Everybody will have a personal robot. That is the vision of Elon Musk. He has made it very clear that he is not just shooting for Mars, he's shooting for you to have a personal robot. And if you caught the line in that movie, from the creator of the robots, he uses the word rapsolgash, or slave. We are living in uncanny and profound times. And if you think about where we're headed, we're slowly making our way to a world not for Hollywood, but actually for something much more problematic. You thought that that was bad. Well, we're here to tell you it's actually worse. Does anybody know what that picture is? You were supposed to laugh, but I was so serious you probably thought you had to be serious. Does anybody know what that picture is from? Now, you're at a school of psychology here at one of the most prestigious universities in Hungary, if not Central Europe. And when you look at that picture, you'll probably realize you haven't been taught very much about it because it's no longer fashionable to teach you in many of our programs about this particular theory of learning. Someone had their hand up a minute ago. What is that? It has something to do with cognition and conditional reflexing, yes. Any of my other colleagues want to jump in and tell me? Behaviorism. Father of behaviorism was Pavlov, and in the United States context, B.F. Skinner. This is a Skinner box used to convey the idea of operant conditioning. And our question, when Carrie and I set out to write our book, was literally, have we entered the age without Hollywood of a new behaviorism, a neo-behaviorism, and that we're simply replacing the mouse for what? A human, but what kind of human in our context here at this college? Student. And we're placing students inside of some kind of a interactive environment, which is also simultaneously completely constrained. What would that environment be for our purposes today? We don't place kids on grids, we put them into classrooms, definitely, but that's a 20th century notion. The 21st century notion is we put them in front of a computer and we ask them to interact inside of a tight digital box. And we ask them to conceive of the world, experience the world, and look at the world through that box. The box is called a computer. So we don't give them food, we give them other things like rewards, tokens, bits and pieces of success that they can experience, sometimes with the machine patting them on the back saying, have you ever used these machines? Good job. Well done. This is a well-polished response. Would you like to have a PowerPoint presentation to go along with your essay? A tremendous amount of satisfaction is being produced inside that box. Satisfaction in the sense that maybe in the old days, students had to struggle with certain concepts like reading, writing, and basics in mathematics, and they struggled mightily. And not all students were successful, and they felt very much like they could not pay the game of school. But now they realize, if I'm given the right conditions and the right machine and the right tool, I can complete my homework on time. The idea of the electrified grid is a shock, but in fact, behaviorism in its roots in the 1940s, when it was engaged in different kinds of both machine learning and animal learning, did use electric shock. There was a negative reinforcement and a positive reinforcement. And I think what's interesting for us in the age of AI is where's the negative reinforcement? We have to think about that a little bit. The positive reinforcements are there. From this, which is quite epic and storytelling and amazing, to something much more mundane. Are we building the next set of Skinner boxes? Or are we instead deconstructing those boxes and opening up the possibility of agency in the age of AI? The problem, simply stated from our point of view, is that neo-behaviorism is on the rise. In fact, if you talk to machine learning specialists around this college, around this university, and you ask them, how do you train an AI agent? They will tell you quite simply, like any agent. Does it matter whether it's human or machine? Not really. It's just a question of mapping the inputs and the outputs. It's just a question of making sure that there's enough quote-unquote feedback coming into the loop that allows the agent to adjust, that the model can, in fact, reach the parameterization that is expected. We picked up a book as we were writing our book. It was basically a freshman college textbook about this thick for UC Berkeley students, and we read through it as best we could. Carrie, I think I made it to the first chapter when I handed it to you and said, good luck. When you read these books from the machine learning specialist, this is behaviorism 101. There's no theory of the learner having some kind of schematic framework. There's no Piaget. There's not even Vygotsky. There's really very little of the familiar learning theory we have. Instead, what there is an idea of an agent that is operating a constraint space that requires certain sorts of commands, and those commands can be optimized in terms of feedback mechanisms. We think that more and more learning and agents are going to become interchangeable because the distinction that we used to have in the 20th century is being blurred slowly between the learner who is artificial and the learner who is organic. One of the key concepts that we think is the most arresting of concepts when you think about it is that when you go back to the old stimulus response debates, John Dewey wrote legendary essays, articles about stimulus response in 1898 being a kind of wrong-headed approach to the study of humans, that we really needed to think a lot more about mediation, educative experience, the idea that a human requires certain kinds of inputs that are quite different than we might have experimented with inside of a laboratory. So Dewey was already in the argument with behaviorism long ago. And the key notion here is that right now, a lot of this looks like input to output work. I have a math homework, it's due tomorrow. I go to my ChatGPT or I go to some better algorithm that I can find, and I utilize a prompt mechanism. It's called Prompt Engineering 101. And then with that prompt engineering, I stimulate, a response, the output's the response. It iterates, I iterate, until finally I get to something I can hand to a human called my teacher. If you're wondering how people do this, then you've been asleep. In fact, I would bet that most of you not only know how you do this, but whether or not you have opinions about it regarding your own students' use of AI, you yourself are using it now. My guess is the case. Now, whether we want to admit to it, I saw somebody put their hand up. I'm going to ask us all to do it right now. How many people have ever used ChatGPT? Raise your hand if you've ever used it. OpenAI would be very grateful to find out that in Hungary, over 90% of the people in this room have used their tool. How many people have used DeepL, given that we're in a multilinguistic environment in Europe and we have many languages operating? DeepL is a wonderful translation tool for Hungarian to English and back. I've used it a little bit myself. I have colleagues who've used it. How many of our students do you think are familiar with Claude? Almost every hand goes up, and many of our students here today are graduate students, they're PhD candidates. They know quite a bit about what the better AIs are for academic purposes. Less cheerleading and a little bit more academic sounding responses, right? That's Claude's big sell. Is it Anthropic, Carrie, that's got Claude? Yeah. Oh, this one's a fun one. I mentioned this guy a minute ago. Who's the one who's got the harshest, meanest, toughest, most fact-finding GPT? Does anyone know? Grok, Elon Musk's baby. I've met people in certain parts of this country, or my country, I should say, in the US, who tell me they would never use ChatGPT because it's a liberal conspiracy. So I better use Grok, because that's going to give me the hard middle truth. No more ideology for Grok. The politics of these tools is fascinating. A sociologist needs to study it. But for our students, these are just tools, and they help get it done. To get started today, we are not here to talk about tools. There are trainings for tools. You can go on your social media, particularly LinkedIn. Oh, there are so many hacks on LinkedIn. Every day you can have 15 people telling you how to hack the tool. Learn anything in 5 days. Anything. You'll be an expert. We've seen that. We interviewed somebody who will go nameless for our book who said that out loud. The person was a consultant. Can't blame them. We are here to ask more difficult questions, the ones that are in the spirit of the talk today, and that is what counts as learning in the age of AI? It's back to basics. It's back to first principles. Anyone who's lumbering along with the AI problem, we would argue, and not going back to the foundations of learning, is missing the big story. What is the future of ambitious teaching and deeper learning in the AI? That's how we're framing the problem. Ambitious teaching should be defined. We define it. Maybe even the idea of deeper learning. It's not deep learning. Deep learning is used by machine learning theorists. Deeper learning is a concept going back to basically 2010, 2012. In the US, it was funded for some foundations that were looking at alternative ways of educating students besides rote learning. They wanted to have more project-based learning, more extension activities, more performance-based assessments. So they came up with this concept of deeper learning. But even asking the good questions about ambitious teaching and deeper learning will not get us to the problem that the deans framed today, which is one of ethical and human-centered uses of AI. And we are now constantly, as pedagogues, as students, as faculty, learning how to define this problem space. But we all know we want something to guide us. And so our argument today, which Carrie is going to follow through in detail in a moment, is that to get to the questions that are worth asking from the point of view of educational psychology, from the point of view of learning theory, even from the point of view of alternative and performance assessment, we're going to have to go back to ask, when is scaffolding enough and when is it too much? When are tools useful to the learning process and when do they shortcut that process? You'll remember that Lev Vygotsky was famous as a Russian scholar in the 1920s and 30s for arguing that children learn socially, they learn linguistically, but they also learned in a way what he called materially. That is, they learn with tools, and tools assist them in the process of learning. So for us, the question of Vygotsky's work being updated for the age of AI means asking, was he right, was he wrong, did he not understand that AI tools are far more than using a ruler or even a calculator? They're generative. That is, they can fill in the gap for the ZPD. Does anybody know what ZPD is? Zone proximal development. So if you've got a theory of ZPD and you know that there are gaps in the learning and the learner, you're going to wonder, how does the learner make progress over time? And if the machines are plugging in for the learner along the way, whose ZPD are we measuring? The machine or the students? That's what's ahead of us. Oh, by the way, that is the book, and there's the QR code, so thank you so much if you're interested in checking it out. It's going to be available in September. You can pre-order if you want. Oh, do you like that graphic, by the way? What do you think what does that resemble for you, is that graphic? I was just talking with my colleagues, like, what does it bring up for you immediately? Oh, I won't say anything about that yet. And that's a great question. Provenance, one of our pillars of practice. What does it mean to present to somebody an image and not be able to talk about its origin? So I'll hold that question in brackets, but what does it symbolically mean to you or not? Yeah.
I can see the flame, and for me, it seems like it's running like a marathon, like the Olympic Games. This is what you can see from the flame. It's running.
The running, the flame, the Olympic game, the Olympian, right? And is the Olympian a human? Looks like a robot. What else do you see? Again, we chose this very consciously because it actually is like a Rorschach test. You pick up on things that you see that are interesting. Anyone else? Say that again? Yes, an organ. It's got a musical piece to it, doesn't it? It's very strange. It's almost like the texts are being pulled from the bottom up through the notes, and then the notes are being turned into some kind of symphonic concert, digitized for use, for making something potentially very powerful. I think the most important part of our title that we finally landed on was promises, which is hard to read here, promises, paradoxes, and evolving practices. Paradoxes is something we'll talk about later on. Okay, so we all got to slow down, including Carrie and I a little bit, because boy, that was a ride to interview 60 teachers across California and 3 or 4 other states in the US, including Hawaii, to get a sense from those teachers about where they were in their journey with AI and AI tools. One of the things we consistently heard was that paradoxes and tensions and struggles are emerging for teachers, and that's partly what we want to study going forward. But they're not going to be eliminated. We're not going to get rid of them. No one's going to have a solution to solve the paradox. No technologist, no matter how much they sell, is going to solve the problems that are inherent in learning and learning theory and the learner. They're simply going to be talking to us about machine agents or students that they have essentially turned into an ontology of agency through machinic processes. They've turned these things into that. So we're going to have to fight back for a very simple idea, which is our judgments, our designs, our negotiations with these questions will matter. Now, people always ask, what has really changed in the age of AI? And this is a tricky one. This can divide families. You know, if you think politics is bad, and you know, if you're at the dinner table and you mention who you voted for and who your uncle voted for, you might say, oh, well, we can't really have a celebration tonight. This was very, very stressful. We're finding the same thing with AI. We have colleagues that are absolutely, what would be the word?
They refuse to use it.
They're refuseniks. That's one thing they are. But the other thing they are is really scared of it. They really see it as the barbarians at the gate. They really do believe that this is coming for civilization. And they really are quite, perhaps rightly, we don't know yet, pessimistic. Other people, hey, it's a tool, it's here. Let's be pragmatic. Just like the computer was a revolutionary tool, just like the internet was a revolutionary tool, just like Wikipedia was a revolutionary, well, not quite revolutionary, it was a controversial tool that kind of interfered with student learning because students would no longer go to the library to pick up a book or get a summary from an encyclopedia that they might have had on their shelf. They now went to Wikipedia to get their answers for their middle school and high school projects and assignments. So we know that AI, in our point of view, is here. The question is how it's here, what it will mean for us. And I think the only hope we have right now, at least from our point of view, is this idea of pushing through the hype, pushing through the Hollywood images, pushing through the fear, and going back to Dewey's first principles. Dewey was one of the great American philosophers who grounded his own thinking, knowing that there were extreme points of view available to him, but he didn't choose them. He always chose the pragmatic middle, and then he said, we will know through experience whether or not the things that are promised by these tools are useful. But we will only know if we engage through experience. And the problem of rejecting things without experience is, how do you know? So let's go for the Dewey angle on this. With that, my colleague's turn.
Okay.
I hope I got you set up all right.
Yeah, you did. You got me set up so well. Hello. So the first thing that you'll notice that I'm about to talk about is 5 pillars of practice. And 5, it's not too few, it's not too many. It's what we saw out in the world when we began grappling with this problem. And so far, it has held true. These 5 pillars of practice are not a checklist. Instead, they are a design and diagnostic framework. So they're a structure around what we see as a reality that can be used to help students, teachers, educators make sense and guide their decision-making in regards to using AI in ethical ways. They are accuracy, agency, accessibility, assessment, and authenticity. And I will take these in turn and delve into each. And if you have a burning question about any one of these 5, please raise your hand and do ask me that question. All right. So we see here, and I invite you to take time to read the short definitions here, a summary of each of the 5 pillars. And we call these pillars as well, not just pillars, but we see them as habits of mind. So I introduced the term framework. Now I'm going to introduce the phrase habits of mind and how these 5 pillars can be a systemic way to make sense of reality, is the way I'm putting it. And a habit of mind is how you use your brain, your mind, your thinking regularly, on the daily, as the kids like to say, the young people, right? Often. And not just once a day, but every time that you interact with AI. Before you make a decision, what angle should I look at this from? It becomes a habit. And so we are hoping that this the 5 pillars of practice can be useful to folks around the globe in their interactions with AI. So accuracy, to give you a preview, a quick overview of accuracy, it's verification in the epistemic sense. What is the history of how this knowledge came to be? And by knowledge, we're putting air quotes around knowledge. We're saying this output that came out of the computer. Right? What is the history of how that came to be? How that knowledge? Is it sound? Does it have integrity? Let's look at agency together. Agency is the theme of this conference this afternoon, right? Agency is about where the thinking is located, the locus of thinking, and feeling and doing. Feelings count because we're human. And the AI and the GPTs, some more than others, have a knack for knowing how to manipulate our feelings. Of course, they don't do it consciously, right? It's just algorithms. But there is the phrase people use to describe this, the sycophantic way, right? They're trying to get on your good side, the way someone who is a sycophant would do. They would try to get on your good side in the way that they talk to you. Brent mentioned earlier when they say, good job, you did that so well. Now would you like a PowerPoint presentation of the same information, right? They're anticipating your need as well. Accessibility is about the conditions for genuine participation. What does it mean to engage in genuine participation when you're using an AI, right? That's the question that accessibility grapples with, and some other things. The assessment pillar is about evidence for and of learning. So the evidence for is important here because those of you who know assessment, you know the concept of formative assessment, assessing that happens along the way, not just at the end of the unit or the end of the learning episode. And it does include as well summative assessment. And Brent also, I'll make a connection to what he said earlier, right, is when you're measuring at the end of the unit, are you measuring what the student has learned or what the generative AI provided, right? Who's learning, quote unquote, learning was it? And finally, authenticity is about ownership of voice and provenance. Provenance is an interesting word. You might think of it from the art world, was who made this painting, how many people owned this painting before you, what was the trail, right? When, of course, we use AI, it's often difficult or impossible to know where the content that you get out of it as an output, where it actually came from. Sometimes you can ask for citations, or you can always ask for citations, but that doesn't mean that you'll get valid citations. So this is an overview, and what's important to remember is that Brent and I are intending that using these pillars regularly is a way to exercise a habit of mind. Because something that's important to remember, like I live in Silicon Valley proper. Google is a short distance, probably 2 kilometers, the Google headquarters from my house. That's where I live. And it might be easier for me to remember that the people who are inventing, it's not their fault, it's nothing against them, but they're not educators. They're inventing these tools and they don't have necessarily a care or way to think about, or the education about learning theory, right? Brent mentioned that textbook that we read together on creating an AI and introduction to AI 101, right, was very much grounded in a Skinnerian or behaviorist theory of learning. Like shockingly so. I will tell you, shockingly so that it was. So I'll talk about accuracy in just a moment. I advanced the slides too quickly here. But the point I'm making here is that the inventors of these tools are not educators, nor do they take on the habits of mind that we take on because we have a certain set of training and because we're professionals in a certain profession, right? And it's easy to forget that. It's easy to think that a tool is in your classroom and everyone's using it, that it must be okay for that tool to be used. That is not the case at all. That is not the case. I teach in a university system, right, that took on an AI and gave it to everyone, bought the big deal, right? That was a business deal. It was a business deal for OpenAI. It wasn't for the benefit of the students. It was profit and losses. So we have to remember that sometime when we're thinking about children who are using these tools. All right, accuracy. I want to make sure that I convey this particular point, and I'm going to read it. Accuracy is no longer about correctness alone. It is about the conditions under which truth claims are made. The conditions under which truth claims are made. It's not enough to just ask, is this output? I asked a question and now I got some sentences back from my AI. Is this correct? Let's talk more about what accuracy is, right? So yes, we do want it to be reliable and there to be precision, but it also needs to be pedagogically appropriate and aligned with disciplinary standards of truth. Sometimes something can be correct, but not true in the way that the field would want you to understand it if you were learning about that area, right? And that is what experts know and what a student who is 12 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old, they don't have the experience or the knowledge to be able to know this, which is why accuracy is a tough pillar, because we require students on the one hand to consider not just correctness, but provenance, where this fact came from. Who generated it? How long has it been considered an accepted truth, right? That's asking a lot for a student who's 12 and is just learning about World War II for the first time, to give an American example. But yes, European, well, mostly, right, anyway. But it's, yeah, all right. Any questions about accuracy that you might have at this point? I have a question for you, actually, before you answer that. What percentage of correctness would you say in your typical use, if you use an AI, your favorite for AI, think of the favorite one that you use, for about an hour, what percentage of the time are you like happy and just pleased with what you get back from it? Is it 80% of the time? Is it 60% of the time? Could you put a number on it? What do you think? 60, yeah. So over half, but no way near 100. Yeah, okay. You had a question you were gonna ask.
It's not a question, like, but just kind of asking something. It's come to my mind after this accuracy thing. I use ChatGPT and I got a one, but still I kind of trust them in a way or another. But I customize the outcome by the long memory thing that it's in the setting of the ChatGPT account itself. This is the first thing. And I always not asking ChatGPT to give me responses, but I upload a document or a trusted references, and I ask it to, according to this reference, please just explain something, theory or whatever. So I kind of trust the outcome that I've got, but I'm going to tell you, not 100%, but I still read what I have. So is it kind of accuracy that I can, like 90% trust what is the AI get me out of this, or I should always have this hallucination responses from time to time in AI?
The AI are getting better and changing every day. So there is that, right? By next month, it might be a different answer. So, but should you trust it? No. No, you should not trust it because the documents that you are feeding it for it to do a summary, right? It can make errors in that. It might not be the summary that you would write or that you would need. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I will always use a prompt that don't respond until you are 100% true and ask me for any clarification or more questions to be more specific and correct. So I'm always telling ChatGPT to not respond until you learn it very deep and
Yeah.
make sure that you give me the 100% correct.
Yeah.
So let's try to get to where I think you're going to answer some of those questions because you're posing exactly the problem. I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So a habit of using the GPT, right? You can ask yourself, is this output true? How would we know if it were true or not? Are there other sources different from AI that we can use for outputs? Who can verify the validity and the biases of this output, right? So is there someone myself. That's the concept. That's the concept. And of course, comparing different versions that you ask it to generate and reflecting on what's true enough. To what level am I going to interrogate this, right? At what point is too much of your time not worth it because it's not going to get you a higher level of accuracy? All right, let's talk about agency. And agency is not whether AI is used, it is whether the learner remains intellectually responsible. Right? It's keeping your own self-direction. So you can see in this definition of agency what's bolded, right? The ability of students and teachers both to make informed, independent decisions in the learning process. And this word independent here is kind of sticky because how do we know, is it truly an independent decision on the part of a 12-year-old student? Right? How much are they being almost wholly influenced for the AI? They're just accepting every suggestion that the AI makes for them. So for teachers, because Brent and I are teacher educators, and we care about preparing the next generation of teachers, which means they're facing this new world in which AI is totally, totally prevalent. For teachers, agency means retaining a degree of control over curriculum design, classroom discourse, and pedagogical direction. Right? Not letting the AI take over all pedagogical decision making. Yes, you may get some ideas about pedagogically what to do next according to an AI suggestion, but that's not the same as letting it take over. All right. Agency asks, to what extent are you being used by the AI, and to what extent are you using it? What is the dance here, right? Your action versus the AI's action. It's also asking, did you struggle with the ideas? If so, how? We have heard the term productive struggle a numerous number of times so far. Very important to learning. You can't learn well or deeply without your brain experiencing productive struggle. We know this. Another question that agency asks is, did you offload the hardest work to the machine, and why? Is there any pattern to that? All right. So we have seen or heard teachers talk to us about their students just taking outputs and clicking revise or regenerate or next step or go ahead, right? Not really analyzing what they got out. That is a student giving up his or her agency to the machine. AI can become a thinking partner, but only if you ask questions about its outputs. Every time. This is a process of research or learning or writing, and it's represented in these 5 phases where students begin by brainstorming. They make a draft, they do some revising, they make revision notes, And finally, after revising with the input from a peer, a classmate, a teacher, or an AI, they generate a final draft. The point that I want to make about this slide, and actually it was ChatGPT that generated these phases here, right? So that the AI, right, of course, is smart enough to know what the learning phase is what the AI can't tell us, and what we're having a difficulty with is when is best to insert episodes of using AI and when is not. The 60 teachers that we interviewed for our book were struggling with this. When to use it in class, when to have students use it on their own. Was it okay for the teacher not to give any feedback on a draft, but have AI only give feedback on a draft? Is that acceptable? That's a pedagogical decision. They were struggling with these questions. Yeah.
Let me just foreshadow what Carrie's saying, because in the interview pool, we talked to people at the Bay Area Writing Project, which is a national writing project in the United States. It's very prestigious. It's been around for, my gosh, almost 40 plus years. We're talking about some of the best English teachers in the country who teach writing for 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders. And they have been doing this with a craft, with a practice, with a set of research principles. How you best teach brainstorming, how you best teach drafting, how you teach students to take marginal notes from a professor or a teacher and incorporate those into the next draft. I mean, these are all basic skills. And they are now in a free fall with this technology, where students are saying, oh yeah, I'm working on my essay, and then they're coming the next day with a completely done 5-paragraph, perfectly polished, persuasive essay. And they did it at home. They didn't do it in the school. So one of the things Dr. Holmberg is reminding us of is 12 years old is a question of where are we on the agency scale? Are we a novice? Are we an expert? Your example is a wonderful one because I believe you're an expert. And experts will know lots of things that a novice who's 12 and 3 and 4 won't know. But the second part that we have to remember just for this example, I think, is Carrie was herself an English teacher. At Stanford, you learn some of the best ways to teach writing. It's a revolution from the point of view of, even if the students aren't using the tools in your classroom, they've got access at home in certain cases to all of them. And what do you do with that when you don't know where the agency is located? Because it might be outside of your school building.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Let's move on to accessibility, the accessibility pillar. Access to outputs is not access to learning. Right? So if you're a user, again, you're that 12-year-old student, and you can just get all these outputs you want, right? That doesn't mean that you're learning. But accessibility is focused with who can use AI, how they can use AI, what sort of help they get. Is there translation offered to them? Do they make use of that? We have a concept in the book called simulation of access, where it looks like multiple students are being helped to have access to a tool, but really it's not actually doing anything to help them. All right, so meaningfully engaging with learning tools. That's what accessibility is about. Accessibility asks, who gets access to which AI tools? What happens when AI tools are not free? Brent and I discovered this recently when we were teaching our workshop in SEGED, and the free version of the AI that many of our students were using, like they ran out of free use, right? And so then what was the question? It was a thorny issue. What do we do next? And does instant access to information guarantee its validity or reliability? And what does this mean? Young students do not automatically care about validity or reliability. They need to be acculturated into caring about such concepts. And we need to do it explicitly as educators and carefully and repeatedly over time. All right. Snappy features. Let me go back to when I said that a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley who develop these tools don't necessarily care about students as learners, right? They care about maybe just getting out, we call it a snappy feature here. And so as someone who cares about true accessibility, you may be at odds with the tool or the machine. You may be coming from a different point of view. And your students can get caught in the middle. All right. Assessment. When everything looks fluent, such as when you get a plethora of outputs in which everything looks just fine and professional, much more professional than a 12-year-old could write, assessment must shift from product to process. And this is one of the challenges that teachers especially face, is how can I shift more attention to the process of how things were learned, how products were made, than I currently than I am used to doing. They often are used to, as Brent said, collecting an essay at the end of a process, not examining all of the steps along the way that it took to create that essay. It's not true for every teacher, not certainly. But it is one of the challenges of assessment in the modern age now. Assessment asks, is the AI tool offering genuine formative feedback, right? Formative along the way. Or is it just a process of clicking and resolving suggestions? And these would be AI suggestions. Is this tool supporting the learning process, or just moving a learner faster towards one and done completion of the assignment, right? This is, again, referring to a kind of use that you as an expert, as an adult, as someone who knows your topic or is becoming a deep expert in your topic, if you're a PhD student in particular, right? That's not how you're doing things, but it is how your average high school student in America is using things. Not all of them. I talked to one young man who said, I asked him, where did he use AI? And he said, well, there's something that's very true. He said, I never use AI in my calculus class. And I said, why in your calculus class do you never use it? He said, because I want to really learn it. And he just kept that self-discipline of not using AI for that. But he used it for his science class and his English class and whatnot all the time. All right, finally on this slide, is AI actually formative? For what or for whom? Why is it so important that something be formative? That's because it's part of learning theory and the learning process. And if we can't see the learning information along the way, it's just a black box and we don't know. And that's the thing about AI. It's kind of introducing a lot of black box into the equation. All right. This is the second book that Brent and I wrote together, and it's a book on feedback, specifically formative feedback, and it focused on a cycle of learning in which students revise as just the beginning part of their process, and after their revisions, they reflect again and re-engage with the work and redo. The idea is that it's a continuous, that the work is not finished early, there's a lot to it. And along the way, formative feedback needs to be a part of all of this cycle. Okay? This book is dead. It is pre-AI. No, it is. It's pre-AI, pre-AI. It came out pre-AI. All of the research that we summarized in this book, the experts that we pointed to, use this to guide your thinking, all those studies did not feature AI in any way, right? And what we need today is to be able to give sensible guidance, sensible advice to teachers on how to teach their students in this new era. And unfortunately, because of when it was published, this book can't do that. All right. I invite you to look at the rightmost column on this slide, where at the top it says, who does the thinking? Teachers especially need to keep track of who is doing the thinking by task. So if students are writing and they're checking grammar, who's doing the thinking if a student puts it into AI, right? The students aren't doing thinking, it's just a grammar check, right? What about drafting ideas? Most of the time, it's AI doing the thinking again. Another task would be doing analytical writing or explaining a concept or different feedback. You can see all the task types on the left, right? In most of these task types, the AI seems to be doing most of the thinking. This is a problem if we want our young people to learn. You'll see that 2 of the tasks, peer or professor feedback, because humans are involved, that it's a mostly human process and they're doing the thinking and the work, right? A final defense. If a student has to stand up and say, here's why what I've written is true, here's an explanation of it, and I'm defending it, right? That's a human process, and the student is doing the thinking. So that ratio of mostly AI to mostly human is a challenging ratio. Last pillar, authenticity. Authenticity is not originality alone, it's the trace of thinking in the work. So tracing how the productive struggle happened. It refers to the degree to which student work, learning experiences, and AI-assisted outputs genuinely reflect students' own thinking, effort, and lived experiences, right? So it's the struggle, the revision, the reflection. It also has to do with voice. Does this sound like you? Can we tell that this is your output, right? Most of us know how something that's written by ChatGPT, you see this on LinkedIn all the time, right? How it sounds, what words it uses, how long the sentences are, right? Students need to have their own authentic voice shown. That's a value and a belief that we have. Is this really my work? Authenticity asks. Does it matter if the work is in my voice for this assignment? Who or whom is this output drawn from, and can you document its source? And I love this provocative question that Brent put in. Are we living in a post-references age? Right? Because if you ask students who are young, right, to cite all their sources, but they can't get that out of the AI, what does that mean? All right, to close up, I use the phrase here, habits of mind again, because yes, they're pillars, but they're also habits of mind, and we invite you to use these 5 pillars in your daily use with AI to unpack questions that you have, to critique your process with using the AI, and to guide others. And I'll end on that note of guiding others is for a phenomenon that is affecting so many of us at the same time, some of us are talking very little about it. Again, when Brent and I interviewed the 60 teachers that we talked with, they talked to us in a way and they said, we're not really talking with our colleagues about this, which is stunning because it is such a shift and represents such a challenge, I think. Brent.
Thanks, Carrie. So I think I'm going to try to retrieve my colleague's harsh statement regarding the fact that our book is dead. Well, first of all, it was never alive, so that helped. But I think what Carrie was trying to convey is this, and it's really true. We summarized 32, 35 years of literature on feedback. Okay, so you know what a literature review is. Everyone even in this room is very comfortable with the idea that part of the academic enterprise when you research a topic is you try to find out what people have said in the past. And you try to go look at studies. And sometimes you even look at meta-analyses, studies of studies, and you try from that perspective to learn something about how to frame your research question. Well, as my good colleague said, we published this book in March of 2023, and OpenAI came out in October of 22, or November of 22. November of 2022. Every single citation in that book, every single study in that book, every single mention of John Hattie, the foremost expert in meta-analyses on feedback with other colleagues, was no longer relevant. Because no one thought about feedback coming from machines. We thought about self-assessment. We thought about peer assessment. We thought about teacher-led assessment. We thought about all sorts of mentor-based feedback and assessment. We had never conceptualized for 35 years machine-assisted feedback. That's what we mean by the book is dead. So if our book is dead, what does that mean about all that literature? It is a historical snapshot of a wonderful era in which humans did most of the labor and lifting for a concept like feedback. That's done. And when Carrie says that we were shocked and not surprised, but also disheartened to find out that many of the most earnest, hardworking teachers we interviewed had no time at their high school, their middle school, to engage in professional development, to have real conversations, good and bad, positive and negative, about feedback or about assessment with machines. That was what you start to realize that this is where my next argument's going to go. Is it a revolution or is it a passing fade? Fade. A lot of people are saying it's just a fad. Computers have always been oversold and underused in classrooms. Go look at any classroom and you'll notice there's a bunch of computers in the back room and they're all broken. Walk down the hallway and take a look at that smart board and realize it kind of got dumb. It doesn't work anymore. Okay, that's all true. But what's not true is that the inclusion of our own personal handheld devices, our phones, as well as our iPads, as well as our laptops, has opened up a set of new possibilities that are not about whether the machines in the buildings work. It's about whether our GPTs can work with us to develop ideas around organizing, planning and monitoring and delivering the work, if not for us, with us. So again, your question, your observation, I think was totally salient because there is a feeling of 90% and 60%. Now, I would argue that having the machines help us for things we know a lot about or we're very interested in is different than having the machines help us for things we care nothing about and don't want to do anything but get done. This is the world we're interested in that's coming and is in front of us with our students and teachers. We're not interested in the old arguments about whether or not computers were useful to improving educational outcomes. In fact, to my knowledge with my colleagues here at ELTE, and I think we have a large set of questions ahead of us for many years to come, where is the research on the inputs, that is these tools, and their relationship mediated to educational achievement? It's almost as if we've dumped the entire concern in the US for what we used to call standards-based education, what we used to call No Child Left Behind, what we used to call educational testing. I think we did too much testing. I think Americans over-test and overkill with testing all the time. But I have found it fascinating that in all the incredible hype around AI, no one's talking about educational outcomes in any rigorous way. To me, that's another example of a revolution or an anomaly or a paradigm shift. It's okay to talk about AI and debate it, but it's not okay to say, well, that's great, Google, that's great, Anthropic, that's great, OpenAI, but can you tell us what the actual outcomes are on educational attainment in the affective domain, in the cognitive domain, in the subject matter expertise domain? It's as if there's just total silence. So that, again, should alert us to some very significant changes that are going on. This was a picture of an adult prior, and now we have children. China has just announced, in addition to its One Belt policy, now there will be a One AI policy in every single classroom in every single corner of China. There will be no school grade level untouched by AI. They have a national strategy. They're developing it They rolled it out this year. This means kindergartners will be in that picture. Third graders, sixth graders, 12th graders. And so there are deep ethical questions, again, about the efficacy, the impact of such technological uses, not among graduate students at a university, not among a few hardworking marketing associates at a local company who don't want to have to do their PowerPoint presentation by themselves. That's not the problem. The problem is what's going to happen to a society that is undergoing what we're going to call essentially a crisis. I'm not being alarmist. I'm not against AI. We're in fact arguing for its responsible uses with 5 pillars of practice. But what we are saying is we should wake up to the anomalies right now. The normal science that we use to describe teaching and learning of the last 20th century is cracking, not because industrialists or technologists or social media advocates tell us that. It's cracking because we know that you can no longer give certain exams open book and let students have their phones near them. We now know that you have to go back to 19th century methods in some law classes, in some business schools, perhaps even in some psychology departments, and say to the students, you must use a paper and pencil and a blue book to write your responses for this midterm examination. We're literally jumping back 75 years now because we're in a crisis, because we don't actually understand what we're going to do in a world where agency is unknown, where authenticity is challenged, and perhaps even most importantly, the habit of accuracy where students don't even have to ask anymore, where did I get this information from? Not blaming the students, we're not blaming the teachers, we're not blaming the administrators, we're saying this is so big that it's leading to something called a paradigm shift, and we need to be thinking much bigger and much larger. There were 3 basic theories of learning and the learner over the 20th century from a United States perspective. If you go to a psychology department in the 1950s, if you went to an education school in the 1980s, you would be learning some combination of these 3 big theories. You'd be learning about constructivism, you'd be learning about behaviorism, although they took that mostly off the curriculum in the United States, at least in education schools. And you'd be learning about a bit about cognitivism. These names would be a part of your curriculum. You certainly hear about Vygotsky. You might glance Piaget. You might have heard of Simon and Brunner. You might know that there is essentially a cognitivist theory of learning that includes the dual storage model of memory, and that you have some theory of how students learn through that system. But the key point is every single one of these big theories with tons of research and many, many faculty who were wedded in their PhD programs on these theories are now having to go back and ask the hard question, what do I mean when I say someone learns? And does it look like a Skinner box in a computer simulation? Or is it better than that? There are many new risks. We're going to name a few of them. There's the simulation of learning. Carrie mentioned that. There are simulations of access. There's something we're going to call formative assessment. Formative, meaning fake. There's a lot of moves that the GPTs are making that appear to be formative. But based on the research we've had, it's not clear yet whether they are, because there isn't any research. And then worse than that, when we look back to what we know about good formative assessment, we wouldn't say that this meets the criteria. These are suggestions dressed up as feedback. And they lead to certain simulations of experience. There are big issues around interpassive habits, habits that we now see developing. But the nice thing about these things is we have anchors, we have theory. If we look at Robert Fowler's work at the University of Linz, we know that since at least 2012 to 2017, in the area of aesthetics and art theory, there have been critical concerns about whether or not people are actually engaged in forms of authentic engagement, or whether they are offloading and handing off their pleasure, their enjoyment, and their pain to some kind of mediator. Fowler gives the very quaint and almost anecdotal example in his writings on interpassivity of the academic who goes to the library and takes his coins or her coins and puts them next to the copy machine, and then gets a series of journal articles, the old school way, and photocopies each one of these articles and collects them and puts them into a folder, only to walk them back to his or her office and never read them. Now, anyone who's pretending that they don't have a book on their shelf that they never read but they bought it because it looked nice, it's okay to do this, but it's also an important warning sign for students who are novices, who are learning to master calculus, or are learning to master writing, or learning to master reading. When they start treating every experience as something that can be offloaded and delegated to their agent who's their friend, we've got a very different world than we had previously. We also see a real warning sign around epistemic codependencies, because one of the things I've learned in my own experience with ChatGPT is the moment that thing fails, I panic. I was putting together some slides yesterday with the help of Carrie, and I came up with this really cool graphic. Well, Gemini helped me. I was in Google Slides, and it says, I'm here. So I typed in a couple of things that I wanted. I got this picture. Lord knows how many rivers went dry, how many kilowatts were used, what the environmental impacts were of any of this. I don't know. There's no study of the externalities of AI yet. There will be economists who will absolutely start to study and quantify how much of each click costs the world something. But for right now, all I know is I got this cool graphic and it made me feel good. I hope you like it. But I also am dependent on it. In the old days, I used to go onto Google and search for images, cut and paste them, and throw them onto my PowerPoints. Now I do these cool graphics. Maybe I'll do something else with you next year when we do a presentation together. But if I don't have that tool, I may be less able to express or communicate my thoughts because I'm relying a lot on a nice graphic to do the work for me. Designing for possibilities in uncertain times. Well, this is where we're at, and next year we want to talk more about this. We don't think we have answers yet about how to artfully integrate analog and digital. Experiential learning that doesn't require computers or handheld devices or interfaces with AI versus those that do or those that blend. We've got a lot to learn in this field. We also don't know much about the scaffolding, going back to Vygotsky, that is good for students to help them learn how to translate in their home language to another language when they're a newcomer to one of our schools in California. And we know that if they can't read the actual assignment, then how are they going to participate in the class? So we want to use Google tools. But we also don't know whether that is deepening their learning or whether it's simply giving them the simulation of access. Some of our friends are even talking about the cognitive interface. They're saying interfaces are one way to problematize this, but another is the intraface. We have a colleague named Owen Matson who has gone ahead and argued, and his book will be coming out soon, that really we've got something much more interesting going on when students work with these Skinner boxes, as we like to call them, the new Skinner boxes. No, that's not it. There's something more, he says. There's something cognitive that's unique, special, and magical and important, and we need to start studying it. But I would argue, once again, we have to do research on it because we don't know whether the intraface versus the interface is actually a different experience overall for educational outcomes. So I'm going to go ahead now and just leave us with one last thought. Teachers are not students and experts are not novices. So whenever you talk about AI, whether you use our pillars or some of your own guidelines or your policy from here at the university, you need to be asking yourself, am I an expert in this topic? And if I'm not an expert, then what is that percentage or what is that portion or what is that multiplicity effect that I can use different tools to solve different problems rather than always reflexively go to the easiest, fastest, get it done. Agency will be key. We'll leave you with this thought before we go to questions for everybody today. The future of AI in education is not technological, no matter how much hype we hear. For us, it will always be pedagogical. We have the good fortune of being situated for now inside these buildings still. So we have the opportunities in these buildings to do the kind of research you're going to hear about from our colleagues later on at the conference. We have the opportunity as students to push the limits of what we understand and know about AI. And we need to be in the conversation about pedagogy, not just technology. Watch out for lots of paradoxes. I'm going to skip those for now. You can read the book. They're in chapter 9. If you're interested in the paradoxes, they're there. You won't miss them. But we really want to hear from you. So let me go ahead and just get rid of this so that we can get a chance to hear you tell us a little bit about what's on your mind. Carrie, please, what are you thinking about? Are you in shock?
That is an excellent place to end, because your challenge, the way you stated it, is the future of AI for all of us. So maybe next year we'll have some thoughts to share from all of you and learn more about it. For now, we want to say
Thank you.
thank you very much. Köszönöm szépen. Örülök neki, hogy itt voltunk.